Welcome to the Relax It's Retirement podcast with your host, me, Josh Leonard, where we talk about transitioning into retirement with intent. Today we're missing Wendy today, Pete. So it's just you and I. We gotta try to hold down the ship by ourselves.
I don't know what we're gonna do, but I'm sure she's watching over us somewhere. So,
I know she is. I know she is. She's secretly laughing or pulling out her hair in the background. One of the.
That's it. Hey, we'll do our best, though.
We certainly will. And listeners, I do have to apologize. I have Pete on today. I had promised Angela, but she'll be on the next episode. We just had some scheduling conflicts. So Pete and I are here to talk about being laid off, right?
You got it. Some unexpected things happening. So it's not usual that it's just you and I, Josh. Usually we have Wendy. So sometimes things pop up. So we started thinking that, we actually were actually helping a client work through a transition in their life, and we thought it was worthwhile because losing a job is something that's on a lot of our minds, and when you get closer to retirement, it can be, it can really throw a big wrench into things.
Yeah. I think this client in particular, we were talking about in our advisory team meeting last week and just kind of discussing some of their challenges. They were in a leadership position at their employer. They were extremely committed, had all kinds of projects, and the entity was restructuring, and they had an opportunity to leave. So it wasn't exactly a layoff, but it could have ended up that way. And right now, if they left, they had a severance package, which sounds really good, right? I mean, getting paid to not have to work is like a win-win, right? But there's a lot more that comes with that. And, Pete, rightfully so, kind of took this situation that we were talking through as an advisory team and thought that'd be a great podcast topic. So, I think, Pete, you did a great job laying this out. I think the first thing that we need to do is just to acknowledge the emotions around that.
That's it. You're in a transition. It's hard. It's not something you expected. It's affecting, your money. Could possibly affect short-term plans if you had a, vacation or you're looking at a big gift. So, it's normal to feel, shocked. It's normal to feel anger, fear, anxiety.
Yeah. I think for this client in particular, and a lot of these type situations that we've dealt with, it's this combination of like shock and anger, right? You're like, hey, I've been so committed to this entity, to moving, my position forward for so long. And my assumptions were, hey, the end point is here, whether that's age 67, 62, 70, or 65, whatever that end point is. And especially if you've done some planning around it, you have a lot of assumptions around what that means. So to get that kind of curveball thrown in can really set you off. One of our friends here in Michigan, we were recently talking to, and she switched positions over the last group of years, but the company she worked for prior, she went through a lot of these feelings because her grandparents and her parents had worked for the same company and had worked from day one. Their whole career was at this company. Yeah. So for her, it was sort of unconscionable to even think of not working for this company.
Yeah, it's all, part of your identity. I mean, you spend a lot of money, away from your family, away from the things you want to do. And part of it does become some of your, who you are. So definitely, hey, taking a step back, acknowledging those things, and I think not making any rash decisions. Maybe anything knee jerk that comes to your mind. Take a second and let that kind of digest. Take a step back. So I think that's one thing. Acknowledging these emotions is that you don't want to definitely make any decisions that are going to affect things that are years in the future based on something that just happened yesterday or even last week.
That's right. I think, when we are engrossed in fear or anxiety or anger, as a parent, we see it in our kids quite quickly, right? Something happens and you can just kind of see them and you're like, oh, you try to teach them how to deal with these feelings. Newsflash, at all ages, we still have the same reaction. Hopefully, we're just better at handling it. So that's exactly it. Don't make any crazy decisions right off the bat. Try to, take time, right? Take some time to process what's going
Yeah,
on.
it's hard. It's hard, but there are some things that you can do just to kind of check them off the list that are kind of, you don't have to think about it, just makes sense. So one of those things that we find is, hey, just you're unemployed now. A lot of times it might be the first time you're unemployed. You've
Yeah.
been paying into unemployment your entire life. File for unemployment.
Yep.
Start.
Yep. I think sometimes clients almost feel guilty doing it, right? Because it's like a social safety net, right? And I don't need that. Well, you know what? You've paid into it, exactly as you said, Pete. You've paid into it. So let's take advantage of it. Let's ease some of the burden in this transition while we find out what the future direction is.
Absolutely. And doing it as soon as you can, definitely helps out. It can relieve short-term financial strain. We know unemployment does not cover 100% of what you were making, but hey, it's something you can do. You go on the website, you follow the prompts, and you get that filed so that you can get that check as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to consider is like if you are receiving a severance package or other things like that, make sure that you're upfront as you try to file for unemployment, and make sure depending exactly how that package is worded or how you're compensated, that you are in fact eligible for it. But that's a thing to keep in mind there. I think the other big thing in any life transition, whether it's retiring or in this case being laid off, losing a position, is healthcare, right?
Yeah, you got to make sure you can stay healthy, right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that obviously is tied to a lot of our jobs, if not every single one of our jobs, is, that health insurance. What to do and what can you do whenever you lose your job. And, the salary is one thing, but now you've lost, your health coverage.
Yeah. And I guess first off, make sure that you've lost your health coverage. Depending on how close you were to retirement, some of them might code it as an early retirement, where you've been given a severance package in an early retirement. Well, if your employer had some sort of, whether it is a Medicare supplement or a retirement health plan, make sure you take advantage of those benefits and know the rules around it. If you do find another job in 6 months, are you no longer eligible for that program? Even more importantly, make sure you get that in writing,
Yeah.
especially if it covers your spouse. Because if you pass away and the assumption was that your spouse is covered under, some supplement plan or something for life, and now all of a sudden they're not, well, let's have some documentation for that.
Yeah, don't assume anything. A lot of these plans are very unique, have some ins and outs. So dig into it. Don't assume you're automatically going to lose coverage. Don't assume that this is going to cost too much for you to
Yeah.
maintain that coverage. So do the research and look into it.
Yeah, and if you had sacrificed and served for our country as well, you might have benefits through TRICARE as well, or through other government programs. So make sure to keep that in the back of your mind. Maybe you weren't thinking about that because you were working and you had an employer benefit, but make sure you check into all your potential resources there. Of course, there's COBRA as well, so you can continue on your current plan for some time as well. That'll help you fill the gap there.
Yeah. And sometimes whenever you do get that heads up to say, hey, we're having layoffs, you got a couple weeks left. What we've actually seen is people reevaluate their prescription drugs at that point. And sometimes you can actually maybe load up for a few months here if you know that this layoff's coming, at these, prices that you're getting tied to the health plan. You should consider purchasing, prescription medications, while you still do have health care. This is something you can do.
I think the same thing can go with meeting with specialists as well. So, maybe if once a year you go see a specialist or whatever it might be, if you know that these are coming, maybe move that schedule forward a little bit quicker.
Yeah, things that might cost you a lot in whenever you do lose coverage or if you're in between coverage. So,
Yep.
definitely a big piece.
Yeah,
Look
and
at
I
your
think,
healthcare.
as we're talking about this now, it's ending October. We're kind of going through the end of the year now. If you think you might be unemployed for a period of time, you can always look at the health exchanges too. If you're younger than age 65, this is Obamacare, as it's so passionately known, but the state health exchanges can help you find affordable coverage, especially if your income is low. The health exchanges are income dependent. Now, if halfway through the year you get a very high paying job, you might have to pay back any subsidy you had, but it certainly is something to consider, especially if you're looking at a sustained period of unemployment.
Yeah, that's one thing people don't, explore all your options because, like Josh said, this is income based. A lot of this, the state health care, the Obamacare, it's if you do lose your job and your income is what is decreased, then hey, you got an opportunity here to maybe, look at those other coverage and get something that is income based.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the most important thing is, find out where you stand, right? So, where are you overall? Take a look at your savings. What are your current expenses, right? Maybe now is not the time to take that trip to Italy, right?
Yeah.
Um, Maybe you need to table that. I have to say that I have these socks that Pete got me on today when he was in Italy. So had to throw it back to Italy there. Thanks, Pete.
That's it. Yeah, you're welcome, John. Yeah. Yep, you might need this. You might need to change some things around. You're definitely in a transition. But yeah, doing that self assessment. Looking at what you got in the bank. Like we talked about, maybe slowing down. Don't start ripping out your fillings to start paying for things. There might be different ways.
Leave the copper pipes in the house.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And obviously with what a lot of what we do, and I know we're going to get into this here, but with the planning is that, what we would hope is that this is something that, when you are evaluating where you stand, you knew where you stood, pretty close. And this is kind of a a reaffirmation of what you've been doing as part of your plan. But, showing that, hey, I don't have to start selling organs here to survive, or
That's right.
I can still keep my pets. But
Well,
yeah,
I
just
think
finding out where you stand.
yeah, like getting a good grasp on your cash that you have available, some of your expenses. I think we had talked in the last episode about a client who was retiring and wanted to pay down some credit cards too. Don't just rip it out of your retirement account because you think, oh, now I'm retired. That's taxed as regular income. Maybe there's other sources of money you can use to kind of supplement to bridge the gap. Especially if you've received a severance package, you might already be in a higher tax bracket, anyways, depending on the structure of that package. If that package is to pay, if you're fortunate enough that it's like a whole year's salary, try to get them to pay it in January, not in December, right? Because if you got 2 years worth of income in 1 year, Uncle Sam's going to get a bigger piece of that. We talk a lot about income versus needs as well. So maybe you had a really big salary at this previous job and you think, I need to replace that full amount. Knowing what you actually need rather than what your income was is pretty important.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, you don't. Whenever you start looking at, hey, what am I going to do now in the short term? It's hard to compartmentalize that. Hey, this was what I was bringing in, and this was covering not only all of our bills, but additional savings, additional retirement
Mhm.
planning, maybe some health care, maybe, there's a lot of things. And whenever you boil it down to it, to say, hey, you know, we don't have to, like we said, start cashing in retirement or things like that. And it's not that dire of a situation because, hey, you got maybe the mortgage, maybe you got these credit cards you need to pay off. But when you start just looking at those needs, the groceries, it becomes a lot more manageable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, kind of in the same thought of, hey, if our expenses are super controlled, what do we need? I think the other thought that often comes up, or like I was running through with this client in particular, is if I'm completely done working, if I retire 100% now, what should my monthly budget be, right? I've saved all this money and, I'm a couple years away from retirement. If I apply some financial logic to this, what should I be spending a month? And if that number is unacceptable, then we should probably look at least for some level of employment moving forward.
Yeah, that's it. There's definitely not going to be a silver bullet for this. But once you evaluate your current finances, that's kind of the first step that we see.
Yeah.
After kind of taking care of that short term stuff, and say, where are we, and what do I need?
Yeah, and I think sometimes we meet with clients and they're like, oh, that income gap, maybe that exact number that you should be spending is not ideal. But if we could take a little bit less out for the next 5 years and work part time to help fill that gap to cover your expenses, maybe you're getting to the same destination you were going to be, you know, in anyways, and you don't have to have maybe as high of a stress of a job or as time consuming. I think we see people transition into retirement and, cut grass at the local golf course, or, maybe they start sweeping floors at the local gym.
Yeah, yeah, or they like the conversation, in the lumber yard at Home Depot there.
Yeah, exactly. Find something that you're comfortable with. I know for my dad, like cutting grass at the state park up on Kelly's Island, it's just like he hangs out with the guys. I think they drink coffee half the time and just sit there, in the shop and chat it up. I mean, but that's a position that he's also getting paid to do. So, it helps with the money for going out to eat or maybe some of that fun stuff that isn't an absolute necessity in your budget.
Yeah, so once you start reevaluating those things, hey, is full time employment required? Maybe it's not, and maybe employment isn't required at all.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that is great whenever we're in a meeting with clients and we get to tell this client, hey, you're work optional.
Yeah. It is totally optional for you to have to do any work. Now, granted, if you worked for a couple more years, maybe it'd be icing on the cake, but you're really okay. That's certainly the best position to be in. I think we have a few clients now that are in this sort of transition in between where financially they're okay to stop working. Maybe emotionally they're not quite ready to be there. So they're like, well, I might start working again. And in that case, just keep your resume updated. If you're applying for unemployment benefits, you certainly need to have that resume updated and be sending it out and, be trying to get job interviews. But I think it's also a good time to look at other opportunities. So maybe you have a certain skill set that you've worked on for the last 40 years, and whether maybe that's a unique coding language or a skill set that they're just not teaching the same way in school anymore. Maybe you can work with a younger person part-time and do some consulting work to help someone else grow in their career as well, which might be emotionally rewarding as well.
Yeah, some of those hobbies that you've had, those interests that you've had, those type of things that I got to kind of tell my son, be like, hey, there's a reason why they call it work. It's not called fun; it's called work. And those other things that you're talking about, those are hobbies. Well, hey, maybe later on, those hobbies can maybe fill in those gaps. And that's a great thing. And we definitely encourage those hobbies, especially building up to retirement.
Yeah, I think, as you're in that initial time period, reaching out to all your connections, whether they're, former colleagues from work, or we see it with a lot of our clientele. They'll come to like one of our client events and they'll be like, oh, I knew Pete. He was in my Boy Scout pack, years ago, or troop, years ago, and they reconnect. Well, maybe just go have lunch with them or go on a walk with them if it's a nice fall day, and reconnect. Maybe you find other opportunities that you didn't know exist, or maybe you see, hey, they have a passion in this hobby. Maybe I'd like to check that out too.
Yeah. Yep. Looking at those hobbies, considering maybe even freelance work. That's, a lot of these things that actually, a lot of times it's normal for people to kind of go into these transitions before retirement to kind of scale back their actual job and become a consultant.
Hmm.
So yeah, explore that stuff. There's things out there, and the people already, it can actually help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as with any major life change, it's always important to make sure that you have a routine. So if you're used to waking up, making coffee, packing your lunch, and going to work every day, uh, you can still make the coffee. I guess you can still pack a lunch if you want to, but you're not going to work. So figure out what that daily routine is. If it is searching for a new job, well, set some time aside. Don't just knock out the honeydew list all day and then try to apply for some jobs at the end of the day. You need to attack that right at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, it does keep people motivated. It prevents you from burning out whenever things get prolonged. And whenever you do have that, hey, whenever you went to work, got up every day, that was your job. Now, guess what? Your job is looking for that new job, or like we
Mhm.
talked about, maybe seeing that, hey, maybe I'm work optional, and I got to start focusing on something I really care about. So
Future pickleball champion.
there you go. Everybody can play forever, I hear too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
This is when we need Wendy.
I know
She would
Wendy would
add
be
to it.
on top of this with the pickleball. I think for me, like this year, I've been trying to learn how to play golf, which I think is a lifelong adventure too. You know, any free time, certainly if you play golf, you know that you could always dedicate more time to trying to learn how to play golf.
Yeah,
Um, finding those hobbies, right? And to me, I think one of the things that I've learned to like, although I'm awful at golf, is the time spent with people on the golf course. So having that social connection too. So if you are work optional or kind of weighing out, hey, do I really want to go back to work? Just engaging in activities with others that, might be able to help you with future opportunities or hobbies, or getting involved in anything in the community, whether it's volunteering or um, like Pete's volunteering is going to pick up here pretty soon. With reading is fundamental as well. Just getting engaged with different things, I think you'll find a good place to be
yeah, and maybe figure out that what I belong more on this pickleball court at 11:30 in the morning than in my office.
in. Yeah,
And that's it's pretty neat. Or that, hey, there are other things and opportunities out there. Like reading is fundamental here in Pittsburgh. This RIF program, we do actually have one client that just by me talking about it, they are involved in it, and they're going to start next week. So there's things that you didn't have the opportunity to do before, and now you do. So just a different way of looking at it.
yeah. I think it's something we always try to highlight and encourage with clients. There are so many great activities in every community going on that you can be involved with, and if you have time, just seeing the impact of that is so rewarding to be able to help others. Certainly something to check out more. I think like with any transition, we need to have our good financial habits. So certainly, meet with a financial advisor, someone that can make sure that your framework is lined up appropriately. Make sure you have your 3 buckets set up, right? Maybe that income bucket we didn't think we'd need to tap into for 3 more years in this scenario, but can that be adjusted? We're not 20 years off, right? So our buckets should be somewhat in line. Having that emergency fund, that 3 to 6 months worth of expenses set aside, is certainly going to help in a transition like this. Making sure that we're able to maintain that appropriate framework over time will certainly pay dividends for you in the long term.
That's it. Whenever we talk about this emergency fund as our first bucket, our day-to-day living expenses, having 3 to 6 months, right here, right now, whenever you need it, you could imagine that if you had something like that set up and you lost your job knowing that you're in good shape for 6 months, half a year, or if you didn't have that established, all the anxiety that would go with that. So it allows you to know that, hey, I'm in good shape. I got this taken care of. It allows you to take a step back. You're not making knee jerk decisions. You're not doing things just off the top of your head. And the positive effects are compounded.
Yeah, certainly so. And I think that's it. Today we talked about so many different topics. Job loss can be a shock at any age, especially when you're close to retirement. It can really set you back, make you feel like everything's falling apart. But with that proper planning, going through some of the items we talked about today, meeting with a financial advisor, reviewing your plan to know where you stand is going to make a world of difference. So if you'd like to, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you if you're going through a transition. On our next episode, I will have Angela on, and we will talk about identity theft, which is an issue hitting more and more retirees each and every year. Pete, thanks so much for joining today. For listeners, if you're new to the podcast, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're thinking about transitioning into retirement and have concerns about it, check out our 7 big retirement mistakes checklist. You can check that out in the show notes and download. If you are unable to check more than 3 of those boxes, make sure to give us a call. We can help you get set up with a proper retirement plan. Until next time, remember to retire with intent so you can live your golden years with the happiness and excitement you deserve.